Well, Kimberly asked me to continue sharing a bit of my testimony. So a few weeks ago, I was in here and shared a testimony about really the things that led me to Christ and that part of the journey. And so kind of going to pick it up somewhere where we left off and talk about really more just how God has led me and my wife into ministry and the various parts that of places we've been. So in it, hopefully there's some, obviously not just telling my story, but there's some truths about God's word that is hopefully encouraging to all of us. We serve a God who directs our lives. He's the living God. And we really believe he's there to direct our lives and to call us to things as he directs us. And I would, when I reflect back on what I would say is my first notions of God's calling, and at the time I wouldn't even have thought that's what it was happening. In hindsight, I can look back at this one time where I was sitting in a Bible study at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. I was just out of college at the time. I had moved back to California from Michigan and was just loved going to church on my own. I didn't really know anybody again at that time. And Chuck was teaching through the book of Daniel. And he was in chapter 12. And there in the first few verses of Daniel 12, it's really a kind of an end times thing where God's going to resurrect people. And basically there's that phrase that says, well, I'll just read it because I always misquote it. I'm just reading out of Daniel 12 really quick. I should have had this open. My apologies.
We're trying to get there too.
Yeah. Daniel chapter 12. Verse 1 says, and this is Chuck was reading this, he says, "At this time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. And many who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to everlasting contempt." But this is the verse. "But those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." And so Chuck launched out on verse 3, and he told his story how he used to take his children when they were little down to the beach on 4th of July to watch the fireworks. And of course, like everybody else, they just, ooh and an on after all the beautiful fireworks. And forgive me if I repeated this part of the story before, but, and so he then would make his children wait there. And of course, he said, "Now what do you see?" As people were all leaving and going, now look up in the sky and what do you see? And they squint and look, and there's kind of just smoke and some of the ashes and the embers from the fireworks coming down. And then there was a few with the light pollution, a few faint stars you could see. And he goes, you can live your life one of two ways. You can live it for yourself. You can live it for what you want out of life. That doesn't even necessarily mean a bad life, but just don't live for the things of God. You can just live for getting ahead and your own glory. And he says, you can do that, and you can be like those fireworks that go up, where the world might ooh and ah at you. They'll notice like, wow, just like we would see fireworks, just how impressive they can be. But he goes, it only takes moments before those beautiful things that everybody loves and oohs and ahs is nothing but ashes falling to the ground. You can live your life for yourself, but in the end, they'll be just ashes. Or you can live for the kingdom of God, and though man may not wow after your life, you'll shine like those stars forever and ever to those who lead many to righteousness. And I remember listening to that, and he basically was giving an invitation almost, if you would, to live for eternal things. What are you living for? And I remember in my heart just saying, man, I want to live for eternal things. And I've never forgotten that story. And without realizing it, I would say for me, in hindsight, that was the beginning of a call of God that he had on my life. I just resonated with that desire to want to live in such a way. So that was a stage of my life. I was still single at the time. This would have been in the late 80s where I heard that Bible study. And then a couple years later, I'd quit the management job I had, and I was working construction with a friend of mine. And I think I even shared this a couple weeks ago, but I'll tie it together. And we were working construction, and we decided to go to the school, to the Good Friday service that Calvary had that day. It was at noon, Good Friday service. They would do them at noon. And we drove our construction truck in, and we parked, and we went into the service, had a great time, and getting ready to go back to work. And as we're sitting there, the place is kind of emptying out. This guy comes forward, who's a pastor on staff at Costa Mesa, and he comes up to talk to my friend Rod, because that's who I was with. It was my friend Rod. And Rod and I, by that time, already had notions about wanting to go into ministry. We had a home Bible study together in Santa Ana, and we were enjoying that excitement of all that. And Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa had a school of ministry, and Rod had decided to go to the school of ministry. And so this was the director of the school of ministry coming up. Obviously, it's the springtime, it's a Good Friday, talking to Rod about his plans for the coming fall when he would go to the school of ministry. And then Rod introduces this guy to me, and we start talking, and he says, well, why don't you come to the school of ministry? And I thought you had to have special qualifications and such to be able to go to that school. Yeah. I felt unworthy, basically. You know, like I didn't have Bible college, knowledge. So he said, you want to come in and talk to me on Monday? And I said, okay, what do I got to lose? And so we jumped in our construction trucks, and I remember driving back right out there. I want to say it was anyway, we drove out on the boulevard. And I was literally contemplating that conversation, wondering about going to school of ministry. I heard one of those clear times in my life where the Lord just said, this is the direction for your life. It was very clear, just like, boom, this is the direction for your life. And so, sure enough, I ended up going to the school of ministry at Costa Mesa for that coming fall. So, you know, I would say, for instance, like the call of God sometimes comes in stages, if you would, different ways of clarifying and shaping and directing as we went. So I was there at the school of ministry for a year. My good friend Rod actually just withdrew from going to the school of ministry, ironically enough, because they called him to go. He was like a very journeyman level construction worker, and they called him to go work on the castle that Calvary bought in Austria. And so he wanted to go there anyway, just felt like God was leading him to go to Europe. And so we had been on him and I together, a short missions trip together, not missions trip. They paid our way to go work on the castle for 2 weeks the summer before. But now they were calling him out permanently to come and live out there and work on this massive new building project they had going. So he left that summer and was gone. And so then I got married that year, and then Jeanette and I were living in Fountain Valley, California, and I was going to the school of ministry while I was working construction. So I went for a year. And at the end of that first year, because it's a 2-year program, I really didn't think I was going to finish. I did a year. I really sensed that now that Rod was out in Austria, and I had married a Swedish wife, I really had this sense that Europe was a direction that God was going to take us when we finished the school of ministry. And so, that spring, after I started in the fall school of ministry, that spring, Jeanette and I applied for us to go to work at the Summer of Service program that they have at the castle in Austria, where they run conferences through it during the summertime. They bring over staff, people who you don't get paid, but you get to live there, and they take care of you while you help run the conferences. And I really felt that was like a direction we were supposed to go. So the director of that place, of the castle, his name was Fred Beauchamp. He was in town that early spring, like March or something like that. And I had an interview with him, and it seemed like it was good. But he didn't give any answer. So I go finish up the semester, So now it's early June, it's late May, early June, somewhere in there. And I'm really frustrated that I've not heard back from that guy, because I really thought we were going to go that summer to the castle in Austria. But I didn't hear back from him. So my wife, Jeanette, at the time, was a nanny, and that's how she came to America. And so that phase of her life, we were married now, and she was still nannying, but now they were wanting her to get her own job. They were going to do something else, the family she worked for. And so, we're just struggling to make ends meet. And another friend of ours, his father owned a dentist office, and they were hiring for a front desk person. And this is 89? No, this was 1990. They were going to pay like $11 an hour plus benefits back then. That was pretty good money back then. And man, I was so excited. Oh gosh, this is great. Jeanette's going to get this job. We really need it. And so, and then I remember the day that she called me and told me like, no, I didn't get the job, even though it was like they basically said it was a shoo-in. And I was frustrated because they gave it to a relative is what happened. And so, man, I remember letting God have it that day. I was so frustrated at him, I'm just being honest with you. I would always tell God off in my flesh. And I would just say, I really thought that it was a direction for us to go to Austria. That didn't come through. Then this now would have been a perfect job for Jeanette, and we could have continued on for, pay her bills. And you didn't give us that. And I was just frustrated. And pulled into our little apartment complex and went to the mailbox, and there was the letter from Fred Beauchamp the very day, inviting us to come out to the castle. Yeah, exactly. You could have called, right? But I remember thinking, oh, Lord, man, I'm a fool. What a fool I am. And just saw, he allowed me to see that part of myself. And brought me to the very end of it, and then led us in that direction. So sure enough, then we go out to the castle that summer, and having a great time. I mean, it's a gorgeous place. We're talking, we lived in a postcard. And so we're there and just enjoying being part of the staff and serving. And so then I decide to go and leave for 2 weeks because two Calvary chapels, the Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa and Calvary Vista from California, both were leading teams of young people into Hungary and Yugoslavia at the time. And so my friend Rod, remember I told you we already went out to Austria? By the time I got out there, he had already left. He had left to go move with a new guy that showed up that was being sent to go in to work into Hungary as a missionary. And so he joined forces with him. They paired up and became really good friends. And they had started a work in southern Hungary. And I went out there then for 2 weeks to go visit my friend Rod, who was living now in Hungary. And that was exciting to me, the thought of like, wow, living in Hungary. and join up with those outreach teams that were ministering in Yugoslavia and Hungary. And so I was there for 2 weeks, and the pastor over the whole thing, his name was Brian Broderson. He was the pastor of Vista, Calvary Chapel Vista. At the end of the 2 weeks, there was an invitation that went out. He said there were about 4 guys, myself and about 3 others, that he wanted to meet with us after the outreach. And so, but it wasn't really clear if I was invited. And I remember specifically thinking, man, I don't want to go into something if I don't know for sure I'm invited. I just thought I was. So I didn't go. And then he sent somebody to go find me and say, no, we want you here. Okay, so that was an important part to me, that I wasn't just wanting something. Long story short, in that meeting, he invited us to come and serve as missionaries in Hungary or Yugoslavia. They needed, and where we were, the city in Hungary was only about an hour and a half drive from this border city in Yugoslavia. So these were very close places. And so I thought, wow, he's inviting us to come. I sensed that was the direction God had for our lives, and here it is, the invitation. So I give my wife a call, who's back at the castle in Austria, and I never forget the phrase. I said, hey, I explained the story. We had a great time in the outreach, and this guy Brian invited us to come. And the first words out of her mouth were, when do we pack? That's the kind of wife I married. When do we pack? And I often share with young guys in the Bible college, especially if you believe you're going into ministry, you got to find someone like-minded who's also really believes in the notion of being a helpmate, that you're called to walk alongside your husband as he walks into spiritual leadership and support that. I said, there's many a guys that don't. They marry ball and chains. And they're going to do whatever their wife tells them to do, And I know this sounds really extreme, but I've watched guys have to leave the mission field because I call it they married a ball and chain. And because, so anyway, she was not one of those. She could care less about money, materialism, could live in abject poverty, being happy. And so we went. We went in the fall of November of 1991. We went back to America for a bit, and then we got ready and packed up, and we moved to go to Hungary, and then I was going to work in this city called Baja. This is where Rod and that guy Greg had gone, and they had started this new church. They originally went to go work with a Baptist pastor who invited them to come there, who was excited because this is right when the Iron Curtain's all coming down, and this is freedom happened. And so he wanted some American youth to work with his youth, and that's why this guy Greg and Rod went over there. But eventually, and it was very amicable, they decided, no, we're going to keep being Baptist. You do your Calvary Chapel thing. But it was a great relationship. There was no fallout from it. So these guys, they had,
Question. Now, during this, you're called to missions, you're going to Austria, then you're going to Hungary. Now, all this, were you, as a missionary, were you raising support also, acting with financial partners, or were?
Funded by the church already.
Yeah, I never knew anything about missions. I knew nothing about raising support. So when Brian Broderson asked me and Jeanette to go, their church was going to support us $400 a month. And I went then, and at the same time that summer, I went and told Chuck, because Brian was Chuck's son-in-law. Brian Broderson had married Chuck's daughter. And I told him after church, we went up and greeted Chuck like many other people, and I told him who I was, and he remembered me from the School of Ministry, and I said I was invited to come out, and I just said, hey, I just want your blessing. Could you pray for us, and could the church be behind us praying for us? And I wasn't even thinking of money, and he goes, oh, we'd love to. Yeah, come and see me Monday. And basically, long story short, they gave us support also without me even asking for it. Wasn't very much at the time. I think we left with just those two churches supporting us. We were living on $800 a month. That is what we went over there with. But never did I ever go back and raise support ever. Churches just started picking us up and just say, hey, we want to start supporting you $100 a month or $200 a month. And I could say in 20 years that we ended up in Europe, that we were never in need. God took care of us the whole time, and I never raised money during the time I was there. So we went out with $800. It was what we when we first went, and we got in this little apartment. The reason why we had this little apartment already waiting for us, because that was the apartment that past summer that Rod and Greg were living in. Remember that? So they were already there. And so I had visited them in July, and so here it is November. So go back to I'm visiting them for that 2-week outreach, and it's a bachelor pad. These guys had trashed it. There was some other guys living with them. There were some other guys living with them for just the summer. But this is Eastern Europe. And so it's one of those communist cinder block or gray-looking apartment buildings. They're cookie cutter. They all look the same. Very utilitarian. No frills. A lot of shoddy workmanship. And I remember it's on the second floor of this apartment. I got up one morning and these guys had trash all over their kitchen floor with the windows open and flies around it. And I'm looking out the window, and in Hungary at that time, they would just let the weeds grow like waist high. Pot plants would grow wild all around there. They didn't know it. There you'd see them 10 feet tall, some of these pot plants growing everywhere. And the awning right below the window for the entrance, you could look down where the entrance was, and there was a little overhang roof. It was so filled up with dirt and debris, small trees were growing out of it, and trash was blowing around. And I remember standing there thinking at that time, man, who could live in this godforsaken place? I'll never forget, I thought that, like, this is just, that became my home for me and Jeanette in the next 5 years. Talk about the irony of God, the humor of God. So when we moved over there, and in the fall, Rod moved out to another place, and he gave the apartment, because we were married, for us to live in this little place. And that godforsaken apartment became my home for 5.5 years while we were there in Hungary. So we get there, and it's like I said, fall of '91, and my buddy Rod, who's leading the work, we've just come to support him. He's working there, and you have to work through translators, right? Because they didn't know the language, Hungarian. And so there was this woman named Sarah, like 40 years old at the time, and she had 2 of her sisters near her age, none of them married. And they had been involved in church work around various churches in Hungary and missions groups, and they spoke fluent, perfect English. And so I don't remember how, but they met her, and she was their main translator and co-worker even, for this new little work that they had going. But I mean new, a little work. I mean within that summer, with Rod and Greg being there, they had a church of about 70 kids that would meet in their apartment, and then they found a public building. They just blew up. And so when Jeanette and I came over there, they've got a good 60, 70 people. They were meeting in a little public room, and they were renting. And what we didn't know is this woman really wanted to be in control of things. She was using really Rod at the time. The guy Greg had moved on to something else, and accepted him to be the leader. They kind of knew enough they needed a male leader, but in all reality, because we didn't speak the language, she had the influence with the kids, and there really was a lot of wrong motives in that woman. I think she needed to be married and wanted kids, didn't have them, and this was her idea of a family. And so I get over there, and I'm with Rod, and for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and he's planning now to go on a month-long furlough back to America. And after me being only there 3 weeks, he's going to put me in charge of this brand new work, not knowing of the dynamics that are going on. I got this woman, Sarah, who's very manipulative and controlling. She tells Rod the first week we're there, we don't want any more American missionaries. Tell them to go home. That was the first week we were in Hungary. Rod comes to me and says, that woman that we're working with and her little leadership squad, they don't want you here. That wasn't anything personal. They didn't know us. What it was is she didn't want any more influence of American missionaries, and because she wanted to be in charge of things. And so she had a way of then, because obviously she speak to a lot of the kids, some of the guy leaders, she was meeting secretly with them, having her own meetings with them, and really spewing a lot of anti-Americanism stuff on and poisoning the minds. So I caught wind of this. So I've got to have this woman translating with me, because Rod says to him, they're not leaving. I asked them to be here. They're staying. And so that was tense. And so I've got to now work. Rod leaves me in charge with this woman who's asked me to go home as my translator. I mean, it was hell. There was a lot of, there was demonic warfare, and there was a sense of darkness that I can't even describe to you. Because it was, now a lot of the kids immediately loved me and Jeanette at that time. They weren't involved in the little nuances of just her and some of these key leaders. So there was some real blessings of being there, but at the same time knowing that this woman is working against you. And then I found out she was having secret meetings with them and whatever. So basically I told Rod on the phone, when you come back, I was explaining to him all these things. And he says, yeah, we're gonna kick her out. And so we had met another girl who could translate. So literally the week my friend Rod gets back, the whole church gets together. As many chairs are here, this was all filled up and more. And we get up there, the two of us, and we say for these reasons, we cited kind of her discord, her. No, we have a new translator at this point. That had to, yeah, we do that. And we actually literally kicked her, said we're excommunicating, whatever. We're not working with Sarah anymore. And we literally had you hear about a church split. That meeting ended with chaos, half the people staying with us and half the people literally walking out with her and her sisters. So I started ministry with a church split, That's how I began in Hungary. Yeah, it was something else, But man, what is it? It's so joyful to get rid of that old hag. It was unbelievable, man. Because she really came across that way. Yeah, I don't mean just to be insulting, but she was. Just an old hag. It's ironic because the name of the city we went to is called Baja, B-A-J-A, not Baja, like in California, but it's spelled the same. And literally, it's a word that means the problem. Bai means the problem in Hungarian. So they literally named the city the problem. The problem. And I'm not even exaggerating with you, that the town logo, because you can see it on the government building, you could see it on the Catholic Church, because remember, church and state are kind of married still in these places. So the town logo is literally the picture of Adam and Eve at the tree with the snake wrapped around the tree and a very naked Adam and Eve as they bite into the apple. The town symbol is the fall of mankind. And it's called the problem. At our church, where the building we used to rent for a church was on Zsákutca, which means dead-end street. So I was ministering in a city where our church was on dead-end street. The fall of mankind is the logo, and the town symbol is the problem, or the town name is the problem. And really, there was a lot of warfare in that place that routinely went on in that place. But there then, we were there and started in working with the group that was left. And again, about 3-4 months later, my friend Rod, who's leading this, gets a call. They need a pastor over in Subotica, which is in Yugoslavia, that hour and a half away city I was telling you about. And so he feels called to go there, and he goes and takes over that and leaves me in charge to lead. Now I'm pastoring this small church in Hungary. I'm the yes, in many ways he was. He led the way, actually, and God paired us up because he often went first, and then I joined him later, and that story continued, actually, that theme. Yes, they were at war with, the Serbs and the Croats were at war during this time. Yeah, I mean, I crossed over, and I could hear bombing in the middle of the night sometimes when I would go visit him in Yugoslavia. So he goes over to take that over, and I'm now pastoring in Hungary. And there we were for about the next 4 or 5 years, me and my wife ministering in the problem. If you turn to Jeremiah chapter 1, I was doing my devotions, maybe like a year into this experience of being there with a lot of these challenging situations, still a lot of brokenness from the church split going on. And I'm reading out of Jeremiah 1, and God speaks to me in this. And he says, this is where God's calling Jeremiah. Let's pick it up with verse 7. The Lord said to me, "Do not say I am a youth, for you shall go to all whom I send you. And whatever I command you, you shall speak." And verse 8, "Do not be afraid of their faces." And this to me was still dealing with the influence of that lady and some of the guys that went with her that were still causing us trouble, influencing, trying to pull more people out. And so this really spoke to me. He says, "Do not be afraid of their faces, for I am with you to deliver you, says the Lord." And then the Lord put forth his hand and touched my mouth. "Behold, I put my words in your mouth. See, this day I've set you over the nations and over the kingdoms." And that was very encouraging me. And then he said, verse 10, "To root out and to pull down, to destroy and to throw down, and then to build and to plant." So, okay, God, it's going to be a season of tearing down, breaking down the false ideas and wrong patterns and wrong theology, and then you plant and you build. There's a renewal that goes on, and really, in many ways, that's what happened. Jeanette and I stuck it out there, and we actually watched the work kind of get smaller before it started growing again. But it started growing. But I'm going to tell you, it was hard. It was hard because in many ways, my heart was not right. I had gone to Hungary just out of that school of ministry thinking, Jeanette and I are going to go to missions. We're going to go get 6 months of experience, and then I'm going to go back to America. That was kind of my shallow motivation in many ways. It wasn't a full motivation, but if I'm honest, there was that mindset in me. And so God obviously knows our hearts. He knows what I was made of and what I seriously lacked. And so for the next 3 years, man, I don't know, it was a struggle for me ministering in Hungary. I literally hated being in that city. I mean, Jeanette loved it. She made friends with the gypsies on the streets, the neighbors. She could speak the lingo super quick. She's loving life, and I just hate this place. Not that I hated the people in our church, don't get me wrong, but just living there, I just felt this oppression all the time. And when Jeanette would leave our little apartment to go shopping or whatever, I mean, I found myself on my face bawling before God all the time, just crying out to him. And it dawned on me a few years later that when I was reading this devotion here, that what I didn't realize is when God said, "I'm going to root out and pull down and destroy and throw down," that's what he was doing to me. He was crushing me. I was being crushed of a lot of just self, flesh, pride, and just
you just get to the point where like, God, you have to do this or I'm done. And so that truly was a process. God, even with kind of like Jonah, even though Jonah didn't have the right heart, God still used him. And so our little church began to grow and do okay in it all. And I'll just make sure so that was happening. The work, God was working in me. He was working in this little church. And in the middle of it, I had a great little lesson. I would call this my lesson on God's trusting in his provision. So in my daughter, Sierra, our oldest, was born in 1995. We got there the fall of 91. I was married in 90, so we hadn't had kids yet. And so Jeanette finally gets pregnant, and obviously that would have been 1994, late 1994. It doesn't take long before we figure out that she has a problem with pregnancies where she has a weak cervix and she has constant Braxton Hicks contractions nonstop through a pregnancy. And so she has to literally lay down for her pregnancies. And so she still had Swedish citizenship and Swedish social medicine. And we didn't feel like, that with the quality of, we didn't understand the healthcare in Hungary yet, that it would be better for my wife in the 4th month to go back to Sweden and be with her family during the pregnancy. And she would stay up there for 4 months, 5 months, and I would come back and just wait for the baby to be born, then I'd go back up there. And so, because she had that medical condition, and that's exactly what we did. I had enough money, I'll never forget it, with the SAS Airlines. There were $600 for round-trip tickets, and I had enough for her. But I didn't want to send my pregnant wife, 4 months pregnant, up to Sweden alone, so I felt I should go. But I didn't have any money to pay for my ticket. But I did have a credit card, and I thought, well, whatever, I'll figure it out later. I'm going to go with her. I'm not going to send her alone back to Sweden during that time. And so I did. We flew up there. Oh, actually, I bought the ticket, and I'm pretty sure it was a little fuzzy in my mind, the timing of things. But it was right after I bought the ticket, and just kind of in faith, knowing I needed to do, is that I came back to our little apartment one day, and opened my mailbox down there in the lobby, and there it was, man, this letter drops out, and I open it up, and it's from a church on the East Coast, and most of my connections were all on the West Coast. But this church on the East Coast had a year before sent out a few people to do a little mini outreach in Eastern Europe, and they knew us a little bit, not much, and they just said, hey, we just want to start supporting you. And we're going to support you $200 a month, and here's 3 months in advance. There's a check for $600, And there I am in this little, I always like to refer to it as a communist apartment building. I'm in this little utilitarian lobby, real shoddy, all the bulbs hanging by a wire above, everything's busted up around you, trash around, and there I am, and rejoicing. Not necessarily for the $600. I'm rejoicing because I'm aware that God's aware of my needs in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knew. I didn't send that out to anybody or whatever. And that ministered to me that God was aware of right where I'm at in that little podunk place and what our need was. And so that was a really encouraging kind of a experience, knowing the faithfulness of God. And I could say for certain that in that 20 years, then that became the pattern. God just took care of us the whole time, as missionaries. And so that was a faith-building experience for me. So we're there, and the church grows, and there was a young guy that came out of the Calvary Chapel Bible College. He served with us for a year, and very lovable guy, and the Hungarians loved him. And he picked up the language super quick. I always struggled with language. So he did really well. But then he went back to America for a year. But then I'm sensing that God's moving us on, because my heart never really became like this is where I want to be all my life. And so I sensed that we were going to move on, and I had made arrangements, with this guy. I'd talked to him about possibly coming back to take over this work. And so that kind of was becoming the plan. Nothing was confirmed, but that was kind of what we were doing, thinking of and praying about. And so I remember, again, there's these distinct memories. There was a public pool, indoor pool, that I used to go to just for exercise, kind of like a YMCA place. And as I'm doing my laps, as I'm in there, I remember to get into the end of my routine, and as I'm resting in the pool by the edge, I remember just praying with all my heart, Lord, I'm done. That's how I remember just having this sense of I'm done, but here anyway. And sure enough, again, that very week, I get a call from the Frank Ippolito, who's the director of the the newly started Bible college at the castle in Austria, the same place where I'd gone for that summer 5 years earlier. Well, they had now started a Bible college there. And Frank Ippolito was the director of this ministry, but he wasn't the director of the Bible college, but of the overall ministry, and they had a specific person for the Bible college. Well, that guy had problems, and he had to leave. So Frank calls me up and asks me, do you want to come? We need someone to oversee the Bible college. And I remember thinking, I don't know, let me pray. And so I'm sharing this with Jeanette, and one thing that happened to me while we were there in that 5 years of the problem, one of the things that God let happen to me in right about the time my daughter was born, 1995, is I was in the middle of teaching in the small church we had. And to this day, I sensed there was possibility there was a guy that the kids from our church had brought this homeless guy in, and he reeked to high heaven. They had the right heart. They really bring in the homeless, bring in the poor. But the guy was not clear in his mind, like you might imagine a typical street person. And I sense he was demon possessed, to be honest. Even to this day, I wrestle with. Because in the middle of the study, man, I just started having these really oppressive feelings. And basically, long story short, I ended up having what I now know, I didn't know at the time, was a panic attack. Never had one before. So bad where the world was spinning in front of me, and this absolute fear and dread just took over my body. Just paralyzing fear. And to the point where I felt I was nauseated, I had to stop and ask somebody to take over, and I had to go outside, and I left. And so I like, what in the heck was that? And whatever. So from that time on, for the next coming years, every time I would go to teach a Bible study, I would have the beginnings of that fear dwelling up in me. We're crippling fear. And I wasn't sure I could do it even. And I remember thinking, okay, God, I'm going to because I felt like I was going to quit, because this went on for a couple years, where it was just every time I was going to go to teach, I didn't even know if I could stand and hold my legs up in front underneath me. And so, but God He would give me the strength. And then once I kind of got going, then I was okay. So when I was then asked to go to Austria, to oversee a Bible college now, a bunch of American kids and some Europeans, I thought, oh my gosh, that really brought on fear. I got used to my little church kind of accepting me the way I was. This brought on huge fear. So Jeanette and I drove over to Austria. That was the spring of that. We were invited to come that summer, but this was springtime. So we went over there, and some of you might know Don McClure in the Calvary Chapel. He was teaching a little mini conference to the staff there and to, I think, some Italians that were there. And so he was teaching on David and Goliath. And it was one of the most impacting, practical Bible studies I've ever experienced in my life because, obviously he simply just made the application in a very Don way, very dynamic way, that, we face Goliaths in life. We face giants. And you can be like Saul in Israel's army and sit on the sidelines and let fear control you, or you can face your giants. And I just remember, God, that was a word to me, because this invitation for us to come to Austria was there. I can either run from this, let it control me, the giant, this fear I had, this anxiety that was there, or I can face it. And I just decided that day I'm going to face it. And so I took the offer to go and be the director of the Bible college, and we moved over there that summer. Sure enough, though, I'm still dealing with every time I get up to go, it's crippling, nauseating experience, and I'm not sure I can do it. And I really told God, I'm going to do this till the day. If I collapse in the pulpit, then I'll know that it's time to quit. You're not giving me what I need to do it. And so, he always gave me enough, to be able to do it. And so I was dealing with it. God took what was, to me, a very natural ability. Even in high school, I remember public speaking I was never afraid of public speaking. And in college, and people say sometimes it's one of the worst fears you can have. But it never bothered me that much. I was always quite comfortable. So God took something that was quite comfortable to me and something I felt it was natural to be able to do it, and that he allowed me to experience crippling weakness. Just a load that I could not even carry on my own. And that was all going on during that, what I described to you as that Jeremiah 1, where I'm being rooted out, pulled down, crushed down. That's all going on at that time. And so it forced me to have to rely on the Lord with a greater intensity, in my heart than I ever have, to be able to do this. And so we moved to Austria then in 1997 to go work at the Bible college. Just to kind of finish that chapter on that incident, while after a couple years of being there and really dealing with this, we had some other pastors come from the States and do a little mini conference to our Bible college. We would do what we called Speakers Week every year, have special speakers come in. And then just after the Bible studies, we would have these afterglows, just a time of worship and prayer. People could come forward to get prayed for. And I was having I had been diagnosed that year with a little heart palpitation of some sort. And I remember going forward, I'm going to have these guys pray for me for my heart. And so these two pastors, one of them from Huntington Beach, these guys laid hands on me, anointed me with oil, and prayed for me. And, I felt blessed, nothing special, whatever. And then basically I continued to have the heart palpitation thing. It didn't get healed. But what did happen is after that, God totally removed that fear. When those guys prayed for me, he delivered me out of that anxiety, and it went away, and God just took it. And then I was free again, just to be able to minister, without that. And so that was a huge blessing to me to be delivered out of that, because it was horrible. So then, we were there running this Bible college, and that became a beautiful thing as, we got this school of about 100 kids at that time, most of them Americans, but it started getting more influenced with, we had Europeans there, we had Africans there, and it started to have an international mix to it. And so God really spoke to my heart of just coming to the Bible college and reaching people that are at that age. And with our Bible college had an emphasis in missions, right? That's kind of where I'm going with it. And what you don't know is, I should have told you, is that the year before Jeanette and I went there, guess who showed up there first? My buddy Rod. He left Yugoslavia, and they asked him to be the director of the whole ministry. It's a conference and a Bible college, so he became the director of that place. He actually, there's a Calvary Chapel nearby in a city called Spital. It's on the other side of the lake, about 5 miles from the castle. He always wanted to be in Germany, a German-speaking place. He had learned German. So he turned his church over in Yugoslavia. He came to pastor in Austria to a German-speaking church. He was there, and I was at the castle. So once again, we were in proximity, good buddies again. And then a year after Jeanette and I were there, he came over and continued to pastor in Spital, but he took over the directorship. Again, I was over the Bible college, but he took the directorship over the whole ministry, the conference center and everything. So here we are working together again in Austria. And we're having a great time. We're just seeing young people raised up. Our goal was to kind of emphasize missions. And I was going to take a lot of those lessons that I wish I had learned. I wish somebody had shared with me and taught me when I just threw myself into missions. And then we would teach the Bible, but then we would emphasize missions truths with them. And then we would take them on missions trips every semester, which is kind of like our students right now are in Ecuador or in Wisconsin. Well, we did the same thing, that we'd break up the students into teams, and some were going to go to Italy, 10 were going to Italy, 10 were going over to Yugoslavia, and it was just a really cool ministry. God was really blessing it, and it was growing. Of course, every kid in America in Calvary Chapel, once they heard of the Bible college in the Alps of Austria in a castle, well, they all wanted to come. That place was a cash cow. We just had to turn people away because everybody wanted to come to the castle in Austria. But it was a very fruitful ministry. And so we were just having a blast, teaching the Bible, leading people to Christ. And I remember thinking one day while I was in the middle of teaching, can't see that clock, 10:30. I have a whole nother chapter I haven't even got to, but I'll have to end it in a minute here. Yeah, I'll do it next week. But so I remember I'm in the middle of teaching one day at the Bible college, just loving teaching the Word. And I just dawned on me. I reflected back when I went to Michigan State University. And I remember laying there in my bed in my dorm room, and I was thinking I was going to go into business, and I did. I actually took a job in management right when I left college. So while I was there, I would think I was going to go into management or business of some sort. But as I really reflected on what I wanted to do, I remember thinking there, laying there in bed thinking, man, I love the idea of teaching. But then I said, well, the only thing I really ever would want to teach is the Bible. That's all, that's all I would ever want to do is just teach the Bible. And I remember thinking, but gosh, what kind of path is that? I don't even know. It couldn't even dawn on me how I could ever get to a path like that. And so here it is now, years later, I'm sitting there teaching at a Bible college, and it hit me like God brought me to a place that I'm teaching the Bible. Just like when I was laying in my bed, dreaming of the future, what I would want to do. Here it is. I'm doing what he called me to do. And, I think of the verse, you delight yourself in the Lord, and he gives you the desires of your heart. And there I was here I am. I'm living in Shangri-La. I mean, I'm talking, you would walk out of this castle, and there is an alpine lake. It's a mile wide, about 5 miles long, with majestic snow-capped alpine mountains all around us. You would walk up behind the castle into the cow pastures and the meadows up behind us. It looks just like Sound of Music when she's running around on the fields up there. That's where we lived. Yeah. I mean, it was unbelievable. Here I'm walking out teaching the Bible. There's my kids playing on the swing set as we're looking at just the scene of just utter beauty. We'd go to Italy on Friday nights, which was only an hour away to get pizza in the Dolomite Mountains, just at a place. We were broke, but we lived like kings and queens. It was an amazing life. We came home on furlough one time for a summer, and Sierra was like 5, and we were at Costa Mesa, and we put her in, Sunday school while we went to the service, and we get out of we go to pick her up after the service, and the lady comes over to Jeanette and goes, I'm sorry to tell you, ma'am, I just really hope you need to know that your daughter, tells fibs and doesn't, whatever. And my wife goes, what? Sarah doesn't lie. And she goes, she's telling everybody that she lives in a castle and she's a princess. I say to the guy, you know what? You mean this castle? And I pull out a picture that I had with us on a card. I said, that's where we live, and she's my princess. And they just like, oh, it was so funny. So there we were for that 5 years. We're out of time, but next week, I'll continue on about how the Bible college, we were moved from Austria back to Hungary, and some of the lessons learned, because Calvary decided to sell the castle. They still have it, by the way. They never did sell it. But they wanted to close the Bible college down, and they wanted to move the Bible college to Hungary because Austrian government was clamping down on visas. And Hungary just seemed far more of a fruitful place to go. So in that next chapter, we're going to go back to Hungary and run the Bible college out of Hungary for 10 years. And so I'll do that next week. Yeah.
Edward Moore, I guess, is going to do them.
Yeah.
With him in any of this at all? Or?
No, he is going to the same castle, and he's doing.
He says he's going to have a ministry like with a coffee shop. Or?
It's the same thing I did when I first went over. It's just summer of service. They operate the place like a lot of conference centers do. They get young people to come over. They give them room and board. Over there, they actually charge them.
Yeah, tonight he gave me, and I'm sure
Yeah.
he gave a lot of people, he did a bang job on that letter.
Yeah. But that's what they do, is that they go help serve the conference center. The summertime is the conference center season. So you get all these groups from all over Europe, and then they have week-to-week conferences, and they need a team of young people to run these things. That's what he's doing.
There's a picture of the castle in his letter. So.
Yeah. So that's what that is. So anyway, it's exciting to know that we serve the living God that directs our lives. He wants to direct us. He's just looking for men and women who want to follow his will and want to be a part of what he's doing. And that, whether that's what I did or what we're doing in the middle of living in Indiana, there's every life he wants to direct. And I think that's encouraging. So Lord, we just thank you for giving us each your Holy Spirit to guide us in our life. You actually invite us into what you're doing in the kingdom of God so that we can join with you as you build the church, that we can be a part of eternal things. And so, Lord, that's maybe a way to close this up in prayer today, is continue to give us a heart to want to live for the eternal things of God, to be like those who lead many to righteousness, that our lives would shine in the heavens for eternity, like the stars that don't go out. And so, Lord, work that truth in us, we pray, in your precious name. Amen.